this is Rumor, and today I would like to read a somewhat spooky excerpt from one of my books, something that I thought I would have read during the Halloween season, and I just didn't get around to it. But in the wake of that, I thought it could still be something to cozy up to. And previously, I've been doing my Readster eggs, reading excerpts from Seven for a Secret, reading a bit from it, and then sharing the little Easter eggs that are planted throughout, or just generally inspirations for some of the story elements that came up. So today, I would like to read the first chapter of What the Clocks Know. Now, like Seven for a Secret, this is also a past-present novel. It doesn't alternate between the two time periods as frequently. In Seven for a Secret, the 1920s and Y2K threads are fairly even in quantity, where this is mostly in the present day, but then there are intermittent chapters from the 19th century written from the perspective of a Victorian voice. And so accordingly, there's a prelude that actually begins this story that is in that voice. But I am going to skip ahead to the 21st century chapter and introduce you to the protagonist and some of her situation that's getting set up here. But what really brought this to mind was the fact that there's a Ouija scene. So following the seance circle spread tag that I and others were playing around with through the spooky season, I thought it would be fun to actually have a little modern day seance. So I will begin with the first scene of this chapter, share a bit of the insider info that I am able to share, and then I will finish off the scene with that Ouija session in question. So, to begin, chapter 1. And in this book, I gave the chapters titles. Ooh, I was so fancy. This one is entitled An Old Soul, 21st Century Chicago. You were born old. At the familiar words, Margot Morton snapped into the present. What? I mean, hello, McFly. Maybe travel back in time and use these pennies to buy yourself a clue, huh? Sylvie held up a pair of penny loafers. Derek gave a low chuckle as he sifted through photographs in a shoebox. It was one of those sick-humored weeks in April that buried Chicagoland in snow, one last time to kill everyone's spirits before they dared pack their winter clothes away. For lack of anything better to do outside that weekend, Margot's fellow single friends sat with her on the floor of her childhood bedroom. Derek Lee had been Margot's buddy since high school, and Sylvie Duran wore the crown as last sorority friend standing. Together, they'd been helping to clear out Margot's old pack rat closet so she could have some storage space as a soon-to-be unemployed 20-something moving back in with her parents. She actually put pennies in them, Sylvie murmured out the side of her mouth. She held the shiny burgundy shoes up for Derek before lifting an identical pair in black. Through narrow slits in the onyx leather, silver coins glinted like waking evil eyes. No, he said, and Margot winced, knowing he'd seen them too. Yes, Sylvie said with brows raised. Dimes. Margot shrugged. The silver matched better. Matched what? Your tiara for the enchantment under the sea dance? A second later, Derek oofed from a well-aimed combat boot to his groin. Okay, these redeem you. Though I'm not sure how the same person rocked both looks. You're the most punk preppy I've ever met. With a grunt, Margot fished the other boot out from the bottom of a plastic crate and assessed its condition. What I never got about Back to the Future, which don't get me wrong, is otherwise cinematic perfection, Sylvie said, flicking her glossy black locks behind her shoulder, is that Marty McFly only gives himself 5 extra minutes to rescue Doc from the Libyans. I mean, he could have gone hours, days before if he wanted to. Good point, Derek said. The DeLorean can take him back 30 years, but not 30 minutes. Margot nodded without humor as she smoothed her thumb over a scuff in the boot's oiled leather. A few eye floaters glided in front of it, and she zoned out again as her ears crackled like her altitude had changed. If you need to talk about it, Margot, she heard Sylvie say. Yeah, Derek said. We're better at listening than making any order of all this shit. Sorry, sentimental shit. Margot exhaled and tossed the heavy boot next to her loafers. Brushing brunette strands out of her eyes, she said, I wasn't thinking about him, but now that you bring it up. She faked a quivering lip. Sylvie cocked her head at Margot's little performance. Really, though, you okay? I think so. Still feel like I'm going through the motions, though, when inside I feel so, she looked off as if she could see a dimension her friends couldn't. Erratic. To this day, I can't believe you threw a drink in his face, Derek said, flipping through a middle school yearbook. Classic. It was classic, something right out of those smoky late-night film noirs that Margot loved. She'd always wanted to do that to someone. Only when she had, though, did she realize how much it sucked to have an excuse to. I just couldn't take it anymore. Ever since we graduated, James has been like a puppy chasing after anything shiny. She chucked a cracked CD case into the designated discard pile. I mean, Zurich? Why the hell was he all of a sudden interviewing in Switzerland and informing me after the fact? Shouldn't I be clued in on these decisions if it means packing up my life too? Or not, but then having to fly 10 hours to see him? The two to Boston were already an issue. It was a lot to ask without more of a commitment, Sylvie said, at a point when he should have been committing. You're better off. Margot stared at the old sorority t-shirt stacked on Sylvie's lap. Knew I never should have dated a frat guy. She deepened her voice to imitate her college sweetheart, giving the douchiest impression she could. I've got to do this while I'm young, you know. We got the rest of our lives to settle down. Sylvie shook her head as she folded the cotton shirts. Shame how the word settle holds such different ideas of contentment for different people. She tapped a hand on Margot's knee. But it seems like you're getting to a much better place, lady. Aw, thanks, love. With joking sentiment, Margot signed their sorority symbol with her fingers, something that could have looked vulgar out of context, which both women vindictively adored. To her further relief, Derek changed the subject. Do you want to store this one with your childhood stuff? He held up a hardcover copy of Charlotte Sometimes. Oh, that's actually new. My crap from the condo must be getting mixed in with this mess. Never read it, he said. Anything to do with the Cure song? Yeah, some lyrics are straight from it. Much as Margot loved the Cure, though, especially their haunting rendering of Charlotte Sometimes, she'd only bought the book the other day because, as she scanned the store shelves, this one had tripped her eyes up cold. Charlotte. The name held tip-of-the-tongue recognition for her, something both so obvious and evasive that she'd purchased the novel assuming it was just a matter of time when she'd make the connection. She still hadn't. I remember reading it for one of my YA lit classes, Sylvie said. The two British boarding school girls, right? Yeah, Charlotte and Claire. For Derek's benefit, Margot added, they're the same age and attend the same school, but one is there 40 years after the other. Somehow they time travel and swap lives overnight and keep switching identities back and forth like that. And they write in a notebook that exists in both times, Sylvie said, to keep each other informed on what's happening in their real lives. Or have you not gotten to that part yet? I have, but it doesn't make sense how their messages are basically day-to-day updates. They're so objective about it when I'd be more like, what the bloody fuck is happening? I piss my knickers each time I wake up here. Her friends laughed, because of course my own body of work entitles me to criticize a classic. So far, Margot's main expertise was writing copy for local business ads. She liked it, but she didn't love it. Yet. Every day she waited for her career path to turn that corner, believing that if she just put her head down and got through the grind, it would happen to her like good things often did. But even she had to admit her work had nothing to do with not relocating with James. She just resented how he'd always presumed as much, how he'd expected she could and would easily pick up and leave, then magically find something better out of state or overseas. And maybe she would have found something, but quitting her own job had to be on her own terms, which it had been as of a few weeks ago as soon as she'd received her acceptance into a London business school program. Speaking of, Derek said, how'd they take your news at the office? Surprisingly well. I gave plenty of notice and I'm tying up all my current projects so someone new can easily take over. Don't talk like you're so dispensable, Sylvie said. It's not that. I just think they respect my decision. Though she'd never been passionate about her day job at the advertising agency, she still gave it her all to prove herself. At least she used to. These days, she couldn't muster the concentration. Ever since the breakup a few months ago, she'd been phoning it in, still excusing herself most days from lunch with the group to eat alone in the stairwell. She didn't feel like herself, no longer grasping what she had to prove or to who. So Margot couldn't deny she'd grown complacent, and her team would probably benefit from someone with a fresher outlook. Anyway, my boss is considering it a leave of absence for professional development and giving me my job back afterward if I want it. No shit, really, Derek said. That's awesome. And rare, you do realize. An aspiring musician who temped by day and struggled to find gigs by night, Derek couldn't, and maybe didn't even try to, mask the resentment in his voice. Margot knew he owned the risks that came from pursuing his dreams and that he hadn't judged her for taking a more conventional route. But still, starting in the same place with the same prospects as teens, they tended to side-eye where each other's tracks led from there, as though gauging who was winning more at the game of life. At least Margot did. She did it with everyone to some extent, though mostly to see if they knew the rules of how to play when she felt so clueless. In the meantime, she was great at faking she knew what she was doing and welcomed all she achieved and received, whether she felt she deserved it or not. Not that I want to come full circle like that, but hell yeah, I know, she said. Ooh, and I scored another nice safety net in London, actually. An old colleague I worked with for a couple of years until he moved back to the UK. He was senior to me and sort of a mentor. I just emailed him to say I'd be in town, figuring we could grab a drink sometime at his favorite haunt, and he ended up insisting I stay the entire summer at his place for super cheap. Actually, he offered it up for free, but I don't want to take advantage. Oh, now you're just making this stuff up. Someone's hot for Margot, Sylvie sang. Hey, maybe it's just some of the good karma I've sent into the world finally coming back. Everything happens for a reason, right? When her friends only shrugged in response, she glanced at the next relic to surface in the closet. A smirk slowly spread across her face, and she reached for the old box. Ouija, anyone? You're shitting me, Derek said, though his eyes betrayed a childlike awe. It was George's. I never played it, but as a kid I claimed anything Big Brother abandoned as treasure. Sylvie nodded with eyes squinted as though seeing the universe with clarity. That would explain the nunchucks. She turned to Derek. I've never used one of these either, have you? I might have attempted it. Once. He pinched at the raven tattoo on his bicep. Remember, he asked Margot, but she knit her brow. That one night at Ian's during the teacher strike junior year? No, wait, I think you left once we started getting shit-faced. But do you remember how a subdivision backed up to that cemetery? The one with the sign, drive carefully, we can wait? Terrible, Sylvie said, despite her wicked smile. Well, we tried playing it that night on one of the graves. Don't look at me that way. We didn't even do it. Just left and played corn tag in those fields up the road. But we were so paranoid over every sound we heard in Ian's basement after that. In retrospect, it was probably the weed talking. You smoked pot in high school? He raised his brow. Durr. Margot slouched. You never invited me to. Like you'd have ever said yes, self-righteous? When Margot huffed, Derek looked to Sylvie. Sandra D passed on grass, and a lot of things. Oh, whatever, just because I didn't drink or smoke. Or what, put out? How about go out, like on a single date? Not true. Fine, but if the one with Ian's anything to go by, at the end of that night, you jumped out the door like a stunt double before he could even stop his car in your driveway, let alone walk you to your front porch. He choked on a laugh. Yeah, it happened exactly like that. Margot snapped a pink penguin-shaped rubber band at him from the rainbow-colored menagerie she'd just dumped from an old backpack. So, what? Everyone thought I was this big prude? I mean, self-righteous? You think I acted like I was better than everyone else? No, but fine ice cracked underfoot, and Margot squared her shoulders a degree. I think I know what he means, Sylvie hesitantly offered, then cowered when Margot shot her a look. It's not that you were ever prude or arrogant or anything, just that you've always set high expectations for yourself. In a slurring flurry, she added, which is a good thing. Nodding, Derek said, she aced all our honors classes and talked about getting an MBA before she even had a high school diploma. Margot straightened her spine, suddenly feeling like a microbe flattened between two glass slides. You were born old. Her Grandma Grace had always told her that too, but until now, Margot hadn't really thought about what it meant, only hoped she hadn't started life out with one foot already in the grave. Yep, super studious in college too, Sylvie said. Chose books over exchanges every time, and you know you still do that. Blow off frat parties? Margot asked flatly. No, but us gals a lot of the time, especially since you moved back here to the burbs. Margot dropped her shoulders. Fine, so I'm antisocial. Of course you're not. When we get you out, you're out. Maybe the last to arrive, but then the last to leave. And you're one of those people who gets along with anyone. You were always the glue that connected different cliques in the house, keeping the peace. Shit, you're like the whole Breakfast Club rolled into one, Derek said, then turned to Sylvie while he aimed a thumb at Margot. Which is why her homecoming court ass ever gave the time of day to a band geek like me. Margot pished at the blatant ass-covering, ass-kissing going on, especially when her friends kept speaking in the past tense as if she were dead and high school and college had been her glory days. It begged the question what she'd achieved since then, what she had going for her now. Huh, Sylvie summarized as she counted on her fingers. The honor student who made homecoming court, the sorority girl who hated frat guys, and now the yuppie who renounces job and possessions. Does that make me an oxymoron or just moron? Stop, Sylvie said. This change you're undertaking is surprisingly spontaneous of you, and that is good. Just know you don't have to do everything on your own. After a pause, she added with a smile, and if all goes to pot, there's always the vintage shop. What vintage shop? Derek asked. But Sylvie didn't explain, and Margot only smiled. Right, she slapped her lap. Enough tangents. You've given me quite the love fest, kids, but don't try so hard. I'm fine. They looked half convinced, but didn't put up a fight as she started unpacking the game board. Are we playing this or what? End scene. Don't worry, I will continue with the game, but I wanted to just go back to that first scene and point out some of the little hidden nuggets that are in there. Just inevitably, when you're writing, you incorporate things from your own life, and it doesn't mean that the story that you're writing is autobiographical or a character is directly based on you or anyone you know, but especially for this one, which wasn't the first novel of mine that was published, but it was the first one that I actually wrote, there was a lot that I took from my own life. So there's a ton in that first scene alone, way more than the next one, so don't worry. It feels like this is getting kind of long. I'll have the timestamp if you just want to skip ahead to that next scene. Go for it. But for this one, just that opening there, which is later repeated in the narrative, you were born old. It's funny because I was just chatting with my mom yesterday and she was saying how her mom would always say that to her. And I remember this because my mom would always say it to me as she told me how her mom would always say it to her. And we just always felt like that was something that we had in common. And it is something that I always felt I had. It's so funny because I consider myself such a kid at heart and like so thumpingly immature. But I do have my inner granny for certain. And like I was very self-righteous when I was younger. And I think it did annoy some of my friends in high school. It was very much a goody-goody, and I didn't drink or smoke, other than one infamous camping trip in central Illinois, which is another story for another day, or better yet, just one not to be told. But yeah, I didn't do any substances in high school, and I did actually almost jump out of a moving vehicle coming back from a date. There was this one friend of mine. I would have such a crush on him, but then I'd get over it, and then that's when he would have a crush on me. And then he'd get over it, and then I'd have one on him. Like, our timing never synced up, and this continued even into the beginning of college. And so nothing ever really happened there other than this one date. But by that point, like, he had asked me because he was into me by that time, and I wasn't as into him. And so, I mean, it wasn't like I was going to be the fall guy tumbling out of a speeding car. It was just as it was like rolling up the drive and probably still in the process of being parked, I was like, well, thanks, bye, see ya. I walked myself to the door before he had a chance to do that. Another thing, I did just generally make the present day thread 21st century to keep that very open-ended for what year this is exactly, because eventually the next scene I will state very specifically how old Margot is. She's 26, as are Derek and Sylvie. But when I first wrote this story, I first had her closer to my age in my early 30s. And at the time I was writing it, that would have aligned okay with present day. But then it took me so long to write this book. And like, well, writing it is one thing, but then it went through a million drafts, and then just like querying it over and over again to literary agents and then ultimately small publishers. I couldn't really make my character my age anymore in the present day, because what she was going through was something from an earlier time. And the more that I aged away from her, I realized that she was striking me as younger than even I was at the time I started writing her, if that makes sense. I just felt like she really seemed like she was going through kind of a quarter century crisis, which, I mean, I guess I still felt like I was going through my 30s because I had a major relocation really shake things up for my life and have me starting back from square one. So I did relate in that way, but I just felt like in general what her situation was more specifically, it just made sense to me to make her younger. But there are still definitely some Gen X sensibilities in here for sure. I can't help myself. I'm pulling directly from my nostalgia. So the penny loafers, I mean, it's funny because those are coming back in style now. A group of girlfriends that I've known since high school, just texting in the last day or two about someone found like the Bass penny loafers that we all used to wear in high school for sale at Anthropology. And so like obviously this stuff all comes around, but that was the trend when I was in high school. I wore my penny loafers and I did put pennies in the burgundy ones, but then I had the black pair that I put dimes in because it did match the black better, and I got teased for it, of course. Even a trend that everyone else was doing, and I still managed to be super dorky about it. But just thinking about this time, like Derek and Sylvie are definitely based on friends of mine. Sylvie is based on a friend that I met in college and was in a sorority with, and Derek is an amalgam of two of my guy friends. One that I've known since middle school, actually, and the other that I didn't meet until I had graduated college. It was like my first job out of school, but they were just so similar, like, I could always have conversations with them about like the John Hughes movies. So like the Breakfast Club reference that Derek makes, it's like either one of these guys would easily make that. And so the humor, maybe his dry humor is more one guy versus the other, but it was really fun kind of combining those two because they're awesome individually, and I just feel like they made an awesome person merged. But that's where Sylvie, though, where it mentions her and Margot like doing a sorority symbol that could be vulgar taken out of context. Okay, so that was directly taken from mine, and I have to laugh because I would get this alumni magazine sent to me whether I liked it or not. Like, I have nothing to do with my sorority now other than this one friend that I am still in touch with and a couple that I'm like, every now and then I'll hear from them. But, you know, I'm not engaged with it at all, but I had to laugh when, after I had already written this, I did happen to flip through one of the magazines, and it said how, the sisters were no longer able to make that symbol in the photos that they were submitting to the magazine for publication. And it didn't say why, but I can tell you why. I don't need anyone to explain this to me. This has to be why. So I'll just say it. I was Kappa Alpha Theta. Our symbol was a kite. So it was a common thing in photos to do the theta kite with your fingers. The thing is, in our photos while I was in college, and then I saw happening in this magazine, you'd see like a bunch of thetas at a function, and they'd be standing and they'd be making the symbol, but they'd be holding it. And I don't think they were doing it on purpose. I don't think they were conscious of what they were doing. I think they were just like, so I mean, if you can just imagine where you're placing a diamond shape below the belt, shall we say? Ridiculous. So needless to say, you can't do that anymore for the alumni magazine. Unless someone brought it back at some time, because again, I can't be bothered to pay attention. But what else? Oh my gosh, there's so many miscellaneous things here, like the Charlotte Sometimes. That is one of the stories that I read prior to writing this story that inspired me. I just really was enchanted by it, and I did read it because of the Cure song, also named Charlotte Sometimes, and I was curious if they had anything to do with each other, and in fact, they do. I will leave a link to the music video for it in the description here, because if you just give it a listen, like that is just the atmosphere that I had in my mind and soul as I wrote the story. I just love it. And of course, the play on time in the book Charlotte Sometimes, and Back to the Future for that matter, goes along with the themes of the story. So it's a bit of like, you know, foreshadowing going on. The nunchucks. So yes, I am the youngest of four, and my sister and I shared a room, and my two brothers shared the other. And I would go into my brother's room and I would go through their stuff. I'd find like these Chinese throwing stars and like really dangerous things I probably shouldn't have been touching, but I don't know why they had them. I have no idea, but one of my brothers did have a pair of nunchucks, and so I would go in and play with those too. So I just wanted to give a nod to that. The two brothers being combined here as George, Margot's one brother and only sibling. The penguin rubber band, that was something like a nod to make Margot maybe a little bit younger than my generation, because I thought of my niece who's now an adult. She had this whole packet of like rubber bands that were different colored, and they were shaped like different animals. And she had given me, as a little girl, a little pink penguin rubber band, and I still have it. And it's like seeing her, it's this grown married woman now. I just treasure those memories of when she was little, but I decided to give that to Margot to be part of her childhood. But going back to the high school stuff, okay, so Ian, speaking of that date that Margot went on, Ian's the name of a guy I had a huge crush on my sophomore year. He was a senior and barely knew that I existed, because that was my thing, to always pick, until I was a senior myself, to always pick a guy who was a senior who was older than me. It was like thrill of the chase. They were harder to get, and I never did get them. It was never reciprocated. And it was only when I was a senior and I just had to settle for the guys in my class that if someone asked me out, I'd finally be like, fine. But I did have a bit of a reputation for not going out, but the thing was I wasn't really being asked out because everyone just assumed I would say no. So I was clearly projecting something, again, probably because of this like goody-goody self-righteous attitude I had, whatever pull I had up my butt. But I still think, I mean, I was still who I am. I would still be silly. I think I was very approachable, but I don't know. I think it's one of those things like, you need to know me well. I mean, I'm not going to be aloof if we're meeting for the first time by any stretch, but I think that maybe if I am meeting someone very superficially, really not having an opportunity to talk, I think there is something about me that comes across as reserved. I don't know, but like talk to me for 5 minutes and I will completely dork out on you and we'll be best friends. So speaking of Ian, when Derek is talking about this night where they're like partying in his basement, which was like such a thing to do in high school, and I am glad I still got invited to all the parties. I am really grateful to my friends for that. I never got excluded from anything for being the little self-righteous prude that I was. I got to hang out and everyone would just be like boozing up all around me, but I could hold my own. I still had fun. And hanging out in hanging out in basements, like that's all we ever did because there was nowhere else to go. There was nowhere in town that was cool to hang out. Like Denny's Diner was like the only spot other than the bowling alley, I guess, but we didn't have like coffee shops, anything to go to. So Friends Basements was huge, and when Derek talks about playing corn tag, yeah, that would be something probably after hanging out in a friend's basement we ran out to do. Living in Illinois, and even in the suburban sprawl of the Chicagoland area, there are still cornfields near where I grew up, but We went to a nearby cornfield where the corn was grown well above our heads and went in and split up, and someone was it and had to find the others, and somehow we made it out alive, I'm glad to say. And the cemetery, there was a subdivision in my hometown that backed up to a cemetery that I was like envisioning where they would have almost played Ouija, but the cemetery sign that I referenced here was actually when I used to commute to Chicago to work after college, and I would regularly go past this enormous cemetery. I mean, like as the train's going by, you just see whoosh, 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 acre upon acre of headstones, and there was a sign that said, "Drive carefully, we can wait." And I'm sorry, but I love an irreverent sense of humor, so I'm here for it. I thought that was great. Let's see, is there anything else? I mean, I guess I generally spoke to like, yeah, a lot of Margot's traits I shared. Certainly as my first go writing a novel, there's a lot of myself I incorporated into her, and I'll admit it, some of my not best traits as the story goes on. She's a bit of a brat. She's really naive too, and that's how I felt, again, at a time where my life was kind of starting over again in a lot of ways, which ties in James here. 3 months after I got married, my husband took a job in London, and we relocated over here and have been here ever since. And so I, thought it would be a year or two. It's been 17. So obviously I adapted and I grew to love it here too, but I didn't want to move because I had my own thing going on. I had made a career change going from finance into teaching, and I was just finding my footing in that second career at the time that we married. And at that time too, my husband originally lived in Chicago, but then he moved to New York. So we distance dated for the rest of that courtship and our whole engagement, and even when we got married. We went on our honeymoon and came back, and I stayed in Chicago and he went to New York, and then this got finalized with his job over here, and so I spent that summer wrapping up my thing and made the sacrifice that I guess you have to do sometimes in marriage. And I thought, all right, I'm taking one for the team this time. He'll pay me back somehow. And in many ways, he's still having to pay me back. But I digress. Or I don't actually, because if you detect a bit of resentment, I mean, I am largely over it, but those first years were really difficult for me. One of the things that helped get me through it, though, when I was being quite pouty, quite angry, throwing myself pity parties left and right, and I just realized, like, I don't want to be a victim, and why should I be a victim? Like, I live in London. That's pretty cool, huh? Wouldn't a lot of people love to do this? Like, I'm being such a brat. Like, I really should appreciate this. Now, that being said, I feel absolutely validated in everything that I was feeling. I don't think it was entirely fair, some of the power dynamic that was going on early in the marriage, but I also accepted the fact that, hey, I wasn't knocked out and smuggled out of the country and brought over here with a bag over my head. Like, I chose it ultimately. So I had to take accountability for that. And I just considered the fact that, like, would I be this upset if it was for me that we were here? If it were my career that brought us over, or my schooling or something, if I were to do a post-grad degree. And yeah, so just coming to the realization, like, oh, I probably would be a lot more keen on it, because there was a time, when I was in finance, I thought if I were to go for an MBA, I would try to go to London for that to get the experience over here. And there is so much that I love over here, and that makes a lot of sense for me to be here. So I just thought, well, I'm going to give this over to Margot then. So I'm writing this story as I myself am struggling with some really difficult, complicated feelings. I went through a depression, and so she will go through one accordingly. I also just transferred onto her this kind of fantasy scenario of, all right, I need to work on empowering myself again. I'm going to empower her now. It doesn't sound great for my husband if if he's James in the story and I have Margot break up with him. That's not a commentary on him. It's not a commentary on my actual husband. But I did just want to give Margot this chance, since she was younger than me at the time, to just be independent and make this relocation for her own sake, for her own professional development, and have that chance to find herself on her own steam, following her own rules, and not having that dictated by anyone else's ambitions. So that's setting her up then. She's just going to be going for the summer. It's not like a long program or anything. She just kind of, she's going through a lot because she has gone through the breakup. She's moving out of a place that they owned together and now leaving her job, at least for the time being. It's a lot of life change at once. And so she just is looking for a reset. And if you're wondering if it helped me to do that and have her do that and sort of live vicariously, I think it did. I think it did. And I think it helped me realize a lot that I was actually happy about in my situation at the time. And it definitely contributed to altering to a mindset where I was looking to the positives versus the negatives in any situation. And that really helped bring me up. So anyways, how about we get to that Ouija session? The Ouija session began straightforwardly enough. Derek kicked off the seance by asking whether there was a spirit present who would like to communicate with 3 mortals. The white plastic planchet immediately skidded toward yes. The game was on. Straight away, the trio learned that, yes, it was a good spirit, no, it wasn't a male, and for good measure, yes, it was female. Warming up to the ritual, Sylvie clapped. My turn! Her toothy smile radiated rainbows and kittens. No wonder children gravitated toward her story hour in throngs at the public library. She boldly asked how the specter had passed away. The planchet didn't budge. Again, Sylvie prompted, How did you die? Nothing. She pouted. I'm not good at this. Come on, neither of you can come up with a reason, Margot accused, and the game's typical argument ensued, with each of the 3 blaming the planchet's movement on the other 2, and all 3 of them denying it. They opted for a less open-ended question. How old are you? So that someone could think up a quick answer. The plastic triangle nudged to the lower left quadrant of the board until 2 was visible through its circular window. Then, with some friction, the device tugged their limbs toward the right in a non-linear path. It reached a point where it faltered and subtly wavered around the 6. After dawdling there for a few seconds, the energy lost strength and stopped. Margot shifted, unnerved that she'd just celebrated that same birthday. Huh. When did you die then? Nothing happened. You guys want to skirt around that topic, don't ya? She asked, trying to lighten the mood in a literally darkening environment. Sylvie replied they might say the same of her. Fine, we'll sidestep the D word, Miss Eggshells, Derek sassed at the ghost, and do the math ourselves. When were you born? 1. Then, zigzagging to the right with less conviction, the planchet ultimately settled on 8 and powered out. 18, Sylvie said. Maybe she means the 1800s, or the last 2 digits of the year, which could be any century. Or just 1 and 8, Margot said, as in any of the 4 digits of the year. Or it's a month and a date, Derek offered, January 8th or August 1st, or the 18th of some month. If we really stretch, it could be the 18th hour in military time, so like 6 p.m. Clearing her throat, Margot asked, Is that your time of birth? No. Your date of birth? No. Your time of death? Nothing. The pause lasted nearly half a minute, and Margot assumed their session had ended. but she followed the other's cue and didn't speak, just in case. Their darting glances still carried suspicion, though. Who was moving the planchet, and would they do it again one last time for closure? Margot knew they were all curious how at least one of them would continue weaving this fictitious life story. It was a death story, though, that she wanted someone to tell, be who or what it may. Casting a wary eye at her companions, she noticed how the shadows of trees genuflected across Derek's features. Sylvie kneeled across from him with her back to the window, her head crowned with a dull halo of sunlight from behind. Sitting adjacent to both, Margot had nodded her legs into a lotus position and could feel the contrast in her face's temperature between illuminated and shadowed halves. There was a small intake of breath, which drew her gaze back to the board. The planchet had twitched back to life. It circled an etching of the moon twice before settling back on no, where it gained momentum and vacillated so fervently it might have scraped the board's surface had it lasted more than a few seconds. Instead, it drifted down to I, then L, back to I, then sank a centimeter where the tops of both the U and V sprouted into view through the clear lens. During a pause, Sylvie twisted and reached an arm behind her for the pen and paper she'd used earlier to itemize storage boxes. Margot nodded her kudos as Sylvia recorded letter for letter with her free hand, labeling the U and V with a question mark, and using a slash to mark the pause. In the meantime, the planchet had made its way back to the crescent moon, resting there for a while until slowly dragging to the far left, dwelling around that side of the alphabet. B-O-O, Sylvie wrote with a heavy exhale and eye roll. This ghost was very original, making Margot picture a white cotton sheet with eye holes, yet the plastic hadn't stopped moving beneath their fingertips. I-N-G, pause. P-A-L-E-R, pause. O-R-C-H-I-D. Finally, it stopped spelling, but dragged back up to the moon. In the quiet, Margot stared at the little etching of the moon nesting in a puff of dark clouds. Her chest tightened with a keen sense of familiarity, and trying to place it, her mind wandered its way back to her Grandma Grace and this gaudy yet amazing brooch she'd given Margot years ago. A large pearl set in a cluster of sapphire and turquoise stones that she always thought looked like the night sky. Such a random memory. Yet now she wondered if she would come across that brooch somewhere in her closet. In all her nostalgia, her muscles relaxed and allowed the pads of her fingers to lie more passively on the planchet. The activity picked up in intensity after that, leaving Sylvie with 3 more words to add to her notes as the grand finale. In here, maybe it's just easier for me to show them to you. Derek shattered the stillness by flickering the planchet off the board, which he then clapped shut with a "see ya." Sylvie trembled with exaggeration, like she had the heebie-jeebies, and bolted straight for the light switch. Margot sat in serenity. Returning to her spot on the floor, Sylvie twiddled the pen between her fingers. "Why don't we debrief here?" "Well," Derek started, "we supposedly dealt with a benevolent female spirit who is stubbornly tight-lipped about her death. But we know she's 26, or 62, Margot said, in case it was transmitted out of sequence. She really didn't want to think of someone dying at her young age. Okay, so she's 26 or 62, which could mean the 18 is actually 81, but we don't know what that would mean anyway as far as when she was born." "Oh, we never asked for her name," Sylvie lamented, personable to the last. "She might have given it to us at the end," Margot said. "Read that back to us. I stopped keeping track." "Well, first of all, before I started writing anything down, there was that weird thing with the moon and the no. What's with that?" "No kidding," Margot said. "What's the deal almost ruining the board? Have some respect for my brother's old crap." "For the last damn time," Derek said, "it wasn't me." "Me neither," the women groaned. "I don't know," Sylvie said, "but when it was doing all that back and forth, it reminded me of this one kid who launched into a raging tantrum at the library the other day. His mom was making him leave earlier than he wanted to or something, and he just sat there screaming, 'No, no, 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 no!'" Her effective impression convinced Margot that little girl Sylvie had brought down her parents' roof with similar theatrics. "You know what I mean?" "Yeah, totally," Margot said. "It actually felt that way too, very insistent. But about what? We hadn't asked anything, had we?" Derek looked up as if to find the memory in his eyebrows. "We'd asked about her death again, so it could have been a delayed answer to that." Sylvie bit the tip of her pen cap. Maybe she doesn't know she's dead. Couldn't that be why she was here in the first place? If she really was. Ah, Derek and Margot both mused. All right, Margot said, I'm satisfied with that. Now back to the notes. Sylvie sucked at her pen as she read off her paper. Okay, there was that time it got stuck between the U and V, but if we assume it was V, then it almost spells out I live. Ha, validation. Creepy, was all Derek offered up. Margot leaned closer to Sylvie to read ahead on the page. Then there was boo. Sylvie scrunched her face. But then ing, so maybe it's the act of booing. That's a weird thing to say. So is paler orchid. Maybe pale-colored orchids were her favorite flower, Margot suggested. Sylvie nodded. Maybe pale orchids were on her grave. Or maybe she was impaled by an orchid, Derek said, and that's how she died. Margot raised her brow at him. Unfortunate accident? Nope, murder. Interesting coroner's report. I suspect Colonel Mustard in the conservatory with the orchid. Guys, a few more words here, Sylvie pleaded in the waning light. Can we just wrap this up? She let them read her final notations for themselves. I.M., Margot said. Initials, maybe? She glanced at Derek. Or a contraction. There's no punctuation on the board, so I say we let her buy a vowel to solve this puzzle as I am to win the 10-day cruise and advance to the bonus round. Fair enough, Margot said as she looked at the rest of the page. Looks like those, she pointed at the paper, can be broken up into open dig and heart clot. Ew. She screwed her face. Maybe open dig refers to her grave? Sylvie's eyes widened. She was dug up. Or dug herself out. And heart clot is cause of death, Derek said. Sylvie grinned at him. That would trump your orchid theory. Not if it's the orchid that clogged the artery. I'm thinking, Margot said, that even if it were possible for a plant stem to stab through your heart, a clot would hardly be the way to describe it. Shaking her head, Sylvie reached for the box cover and contemplated it for a moment. Amazing how they can mass-produce portals to the dead. Derek snorted. Yeah, makes you wonder what could have crept into the Monopoly boards at the warehouse. Maybe all the little green plastic houses are haunted. And that's why Santa, an anagram of Satan, gave both games to my brother, Margot said. Mwahaha. Or a Satan Santa would say, mwaho. Seriously, Sylvie insisted. It seems a little irresponsible, doesn't it? Marketing a seance as a game? It's a scam is what it is, Derek said, created by ye old charlatans and still cashed in on by ye new capitalists. Money talks more than ghosts do, Margot said, bobbing her head. But relax, Sylvie, Derek said. If you think there's something to this, as long as you make your peaceful goodbyes, you sever the contact and no ghost can haunt or possess you. At least not permanently. Hardy har. Margot glanced out the window at the low sun. Its fading light on the window screen applied a sepia filter to her view of the yard outside, like an old photograph. A chill gripped her spine just then, and she sat upright, rigid. I don't remember saying goodbye. Do you? Well, do we have to actually say it? Derek asked. Shouldn't the ghost bear the burden? Sylvie huffed. Do you invite guests over for a party just to let them see themselves out while you sit on your inhospitable ass? Absolutely. Here's your hat. What's your hurry? Host with the most. Thank you. And she's ghost with the most for understanding. Margot leaned over to snatch the brittle playing instructions from the Ouija box. How depressing that paper printed in our childhood is already yellowing. She murmured a stream of directions, skimming for something relevant. Doesn't say anything about ending the game, just protocol for asking questions. Guess we have nothing to worry about then. Sylvie shrugged and, packing up the game as they'd found it, checked with Margot for her final sorting task. So, where does this belong? The discard pile. And thus concludes chapter 1. As promised, not that many Easter eggs planted in there. Just a little bit more explanation on Sylvie's backstory. based on my friend who is also a librarian. And the brooch that comes to Margot's mind, seemingly at random during this game, that reminds her of the moon in the night sky, the grandma that gave it to her, I was thinking about my mom's mom, who, when she passed away, she had given me, I considered it a treasure trove of just really, sorry grandma, but gaudy jewelry. But so fun for a kid to play with, you know. It was nothing valuable, just almost like costume jewelry, a lot of rhinestones and such. And so I loved it and I was all over it. But that also, just the idea of like this brooch from this grandma, and even the character Margot herself, reminded me that that actually all came from a short story that I first wrote in grad school for a class. And it was just for a school assignment. And so, I mean, it wasn't until several years later that obviously that I thought of expanding on it, actually turning into a novel. And I would have never known just from the story that I wrote at the time what sort of potential that had, but I did start from there. And actually a lot of that story was originally in the manuscript. But once I actually saw the story through and saw new possibilities and where it ultimately went, you know, this was my first lesson in killing your darlings, because it was so daunting to like start writing something novel length to begin with. I just kind of wanted to use anything that I had ever written. I wanted to use everything because I'm just thinking word count. I got to get word count out. But when you actually rack up the word count and everything, it's like you have to actually shape that story and get that arc going more discernibly. And yeah, I had a lot of extraneous shit just at the beginning, honestly. And some of the best feedback that I got early on in the process, after, it wasn't like my first draft, but after I maybe revised it a few times, I still wasn't seeing it for myself. So this is why it's like, if you write something, you have to have someone else read it. You have to have that other feedback. You can sit there thinking it's perfect. I doubt that's the case though, because I don't know if anyone could be more insecure than a writer or any kind of creator. But I do think that sometimes we can get protective over our ideas and get defensive maybe if there's criticism of them, but you really do have to open yourself up to it, because what I was completely blind to, someone else was like, your story starts chapter 3. And I was like, what? I'm not hacking out entire chapters. Are you kidding me? Especially the beginning of the story. But of course, because the beginning of the story was the roughest. That's what I was like really cutting my teeth on, having no idea where this story was going to go. I had not outlined anything. It was just like as rookie as it comes. But I mean, it was such a valuable experience for me. But yeah, sure enough, someone was like, no, it needs to start in this scene where they play Ouija. So I did hack out those other chapters, moved this earlier, rewrote it so that it sounded more like an opening chapter. And then some of that stuff that was cut, though, it's like you don't have to totally be pulling out all the writerly expressions. You don't have to totally throw out the baby with the bathwater. Some of that stuff got incorporated into later chapters because, you know, you don't need to have like all your exposition, and actually you really shouldn't have all your exposition right at the beginning. It's good to kind of parcel that stuff out as you go. Otherwise, it's just this info dump that people have to like crawl their way through, and it doesn't work with pacing out the plot line at all. So you don't have to give up everything that you are deleting from a manuscript. You can try to see if there's somewhere else, especially if it's backstory. So in this case, the short story that I had written in grad school was something that had happened to Margot before this. And even that being said, a lot of it I kind of removed as part of her backstory. And there was one bit of it remaining that I stuck into a later chapter, probably the one following this. And then that symbol of the brooch, because that is something that is going to reappear throughout the course of the story as well. So, all right, that's it. Thank you, as always, for joining me here and sticking out through my long rambles, or just skipping ahead with the timestamps. That's totally fine too. But I do really appreciate it, and I hope that this gave you some post-Halloween spooky feelings, and that if you have anything that you'd like to share with me in the comments, that you will please do so. And I will see you next time, my dears. Bye-bye.